All right, let's get started. March 18th, 2024, our inspirational interview with Erin Spencer. I just want to mention that Artful Minds is an online community dedicated to nurturing artistic talents and fostering the creative growth of its members. One of our most popular events by far is our monthly critiques. In those, I take the images and digitally manipulate them, and we go through them step by step in a conversation through Zoom. If that's something that interests you, head on over to artfulminds.ca and check out our premium and critique membership. All right, let's get started. My name is Michael King, and I'm your host tonight for our inspirational interview with Erin Spencer. You can find her online at erinspencerart.com, and her Instagram handle is Erin Spencer Art. Pretty easy. Saying that, Erin's style leans towards tonalism as she seeks to distill the elements of the landscape to their simplest forms, looking for a balance between representational, abstract mark making, and emotional gesture. Welcome, Erin. Thank you very much for doing this interview.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I'm going to show some images of your paintings. And as I go through, can you just tell us briefly about your journey through painting?
Sure. So I didn't come to art maybe through the typical route. I loved art as a kid, but I didn't study it in school. I didn't go to college for art. So I started painting in oils in about 2007 after seeing another artist friend of mine that was trying to switch over to being a full-time artist. And so she put on an open house in her home, and I went and I walked out of there and I said, that's what I want to do. And so I started painting on my own at that time. And I mean, more or less, I'm a self-taught artist. I really haven't studied extensively with any in particular artists. I haven't really taken a lot of workshops or anything like that. So I always say that my best teacher has been nature itself and just being out, lots of trial and error, lots of really bad paintings over the years. And just really, yeah, pursuing this passion that I have, I guess, to capture the landscape and just the impressions that I have of the world around me. So yeah, and I live in Rhode Island with my family, my husband and our three kids, and I've basically always been a mom as I've been an artist. And so our oldest was born about a year after I started painting. So I guess for me, it's kind of all intermeshed, that's my life. That's my world. So I love it. I love it so much. I paint almost every day. And yeah, I guess that's a little bit in a nutshell where I'm at.
Thank you for that. That's nice. Now, that's one thing I didn't know. I didn't know you were strictly self-taught and that you didn't go to art school. So I have to say, wow,
Yeah.
because your paintings, they're very toneless and they're very
Mhm.
close in value, very compressed values at times. Sometimes you have the punchy clouds, but and that's a difficult way to paint for a lot of people because when you see artists compress values, it just turns mucky. But you seem to have a really good control over your hues, your temperatures, and your values. When you started out, did it come easy or did you have to struggle with those?
No, I'm sure it didn't come easy. And I do feel that the more I paint, the more I'm able to see those subtle shifts in values. I don't think that when I first started painting, I could see all of that. And I think that's something that you kind of evolve with as an artist, that you kind of evolve into being able to see in new ways. It's something that I've often thought of when I'm teaching workshops and talking to students is that you kind of go through these cycles of being able to see further than you can execute. And then you kind of get to that point of being frustrated with your work. So I always tell people it's good to be frustrated because that means you're in a place where you can see beyond what you can execute. That's why you're frustrated. So that's good because that's so much of, I think, a huge part of being an artist is learning to see different and new in new ways. And so that comes with observation, it comes with practice. And then I feel like you kind of work up towards being able to execute what you can see. And then you're kind of at the top of that cycle and you're kind of feeling like, okay, I've learned this, I've mastered this new thing. And then you have to start it all over again. So I think I'm always in that, kind of going around in that circle. So I try to be okay with the fact that maybe it's not where I want it to be right now, because that means that I'm on the right track, I guess. If I'm able to see that I want to do more and do new things and try new things, whether it's with values like you're talking about, or with subject matter, composition, being more courageous, trying new things. So when I first started painting, I was painting from photographs. more or less exclusively for probably the first like year or so of painting. I mean, I was probably painting from some things that I was seeing, but a lot of it was from photographs. And then when we moved to Rhode Island, about a year after I started painting, that's when I really started to do plein air painting and getting outside and trying to paint from life. And that was a huge game changer, you know? So,
Yeah, that was probably one of those circle moments where you're sitting out there frustrated, not figuring out how you could make this work, right?
oh yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, plein air painting is still like that, you know. I think it's not easy, you know. You're trying to take so much information and bringing it into this two-dimensional, you know, rectangle or square. And so you really have to learn to kind of hone in on what you really want to say in that painting. And you have to extrapolate from all of this and condense it down into something simple and something you can execute, you know. So
But saying that though, you probably chose the most difficult aspect of plein air painting, and that's painting skies. I mean, I don't know what you're thinking. Yeah, they're a nemesis of
yeah,
mine. Now, can you give any tips or any approaches for painting skies because they just change so fast?
they do. I was just actually at an opening the other night, and I had someone that came and we were talking about this exact thing. And so something that I was saying that night, and something I've said before, is, you know, I feel like so when I first started painting skies, I felt like they looked like bricks in the sky, you know, just rocks. Like I had no concept. I don't think I had a concept of, I just thought of clouds as objects, you know, and so I think over time I've just learned to see them differently. And so I like to think of the sky as not being an afterthought in a composition with my painting, but it is part of the composition. The sky is actually the whole painting, the atmosphere in the sky, it's everything in the painting. And so the part of that that's above the horizon line tends to be what we think of as the sky, you know? And so, but I like to think that it kind of encompasses the entire painting, and the sky, what's above the horizon is just an extension of the whole landscape. And so I like to think of the clouds as being part of the composition. So when I'm out painting, I'm looking also at the sky as being part of the composition that I want to capture in that moment. And so sometimes there's no clouds. And so then you're looking at, you know, negative space. But how am I going to use that negative space to complement this composition? You know, how can I utilize that? Do I raise the horizon line? Do I bring it down lower? And, you know, just all these thoughts. But something that I guess I do when I'm out plein air painting is if I see a shape in the sky that I really want to incorporate into my composition, I'll sometimes sketch it. Rarely will I take a photograph. I don't feel like I get much from a photograph personally. I don't paint from photographs anymore, really. Maybe I'll use them as a reference point in the beginning, you know, to get ideas of composition and maybe some color ideas, but I really don't use them much to paint from. But on location, it's more maybe a quick sketch to get a shape down that I want to utilize. And then I'll reference nature and the sky and the landscape more for color and light, and not so much for that particular shape, if that makes sense, or those particular shapes that I'm looking for to balance the composition. And that being said, I think another thing that I often tell students is to not be afraid to move things around in your painting. Like if you put it in initially and then it's moved and you like this better, what you're looking at now, and it feels like it's going to work better in the composition, change it, you know, scrape it back a little bit, go back into it, keep working at it. And I think that actually can benefit the painting because you're not going to just give the illusion of movement, but you kind of get the movement in the painting because you are moving. You're literally moving things around in the sky, and the clouds are
Hmm.
moving in your painting while they're moving around. And so you get kind of different layers there, and that can create a lot of interest, I think.
That's a very interesting statement because you do have a YouTube channel and you do have one video of you plein air painting the full process. And yeah, you do in your sky move things as you progress. That's an
Yeah.
interesting way to look at it.
Well, sometimes you start painting and there's no clouds in the sky, and it's,
Mm.
you know, you're kind of depressed because you wanted to paint clouds. And so you might be kind of putting in, so even for me, sometimes when there's no clouds, I can end up with clouds in my painting because I can look at the sky and I can see where maybe there's a value shift in the sky. And then maybe in my painting, I can exaggerate that value shift so that it
Oh, interesting.
appears to be more of a cloud or more of a shape, I guess. Not necessarily even a cloud, but just shapes, even in that negative space. You can create different shapes within it, changing the temperature perhaps. Maybe the value is staying the same in the sky, but the temperature is different. And so you get a shape because you've changed the temperature in this one area. And so then it creates a new shape.
Mhm.
So
That's a
yeah,
fantastic idea.
playing around.
Oh, I know where I'm going after this.
Get out there.
Uh,
Not yet, right? But yeah, soon.
yeah, soon. Jumping back to the initial part of the conversation about tonalism,
Hmm.
that's kind of you're not full tonalist, but you're very much there, especially in the land part of your landscapes. But has that always been where you have been, or did that develop over time from when you first started?
I mean, probably. So, I mean, if I can't invite anyone to look at old paintings of mine because they're embarrassing, but for me, I guess even some of those older paintings that I have. So the first painting I ever sold on my website, I was so excited. I went to see who bought it. It was my mom. And so and then so she has a lot, my parents have a lot of my art in their home. But this one, the one that they bought, I still see it in their house. And I actually still kind of like that painting. I'm like, huh, it feels like something I would still do today. So I do feel like I've always been aesthetically drawn to a tonalist style of painting. Even now, if I go through, if I'm, in a museum or I'm on, like, there's a few Instagram profiles that I follow that just kind of post a bunch of different kinds of art. And so then, and if I scroll through that, I can tell exactly which paintings I'm drawn to. And definitely a lot of them tend to be tonalist paintings. But I think also I'm drawn to paintings that rely heavily on shapes and composition to get the message out. And so, I mean, if you look at my work, it's definitely very heavily influenced by the colors in my own environment where I live,
Mm.
very green, very, very cool colors often. I can branch out from that every now and then, but it's not the natural way that things come out typically. But yeah, so I don't know. I mean, I'm definitely drawn to that tonalist style, like kind of a lyrical style in my art. And that's kind of what I've been drawn to in art, but also just even in what I want to paint, what I'm drawn to in the landscape.
Hmm. And one thing I've noticed as well is you keep your shapes to a minimum and you keep them large. You don't really get too detailed in any of them, even your clouds, even in your land, there's no real sense of grasses. There's just mass of value and
Mhm.
temperature. How hard is it to do that? Not get it caught up
Um,
in all the
I,
detail.
so I feel like it's actually, for me, it would be harder to try to work in more detail because I don't think I have the skill set for it. I heard an artist once say, when he was asked, what's your style and why does this your style? And he's like, well, wherever your skills end, that's where your style ends up. That's what style you are. So some artists that I look at, like Leviton, for instance, I love his landscapes. And I think he tends to kind of work in large shapes as well, but he also adds a lot more fine detail than I do in my art. But so sometimes I look at that work and I think, oh, I would love to be able to add that kind of beautiful, crisp detail to just lend a little bit more to this landscape. But that's something maybe I work towards as I continue to progress as an artist. But for me at this stage, I do feel like composition is the key, I guess, to a good painting. That's how I feel when I'm looking at art. That's the first thing I think you see is the composition. Everything else seems secondary to me. So for me, it is all about those shapes, how they relate to each other, how they fit together, what negative shapes they create when they're together. And that for me is, I guess, what really draws me to a subject is a beautiful composition.
Hmm.
I don't, like I said, I don't even paint. I don't paint my larger works even from my plein air sketches. I paint pretty much everything from sketches, just from value sketches that I make on location. And I think that works for me because it is ultimately about the composition and the colors and all of that come second for me. So I'll use color notes in my notebook and things like that. But typically I'm just painting from those shapes and those composition sketches that I'm making. I often tell students when they're really trying to see composition, to just pick three or four basic shapes and lay those in, a sketchbook and see how you can move them around so that they work together. So I don't know. I mean, it doesn't always work out. It's not like every painting's just 3 or 4 shapes, but I like to keep that simple. I guess I do like that.
Start off simple, then if you need to add a couple more here and there, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Interesting. Now, everyone's definition of composition and their process towards it, I find, is different. When you say composition, or when you're thinking about composition, is it analytical, or is it more of, yeah, this feels like it needs to be there. I need to balance that. I need to push something here. What is it? What side of the
Yeah, it's
brain are you on?
definitely the latter. I'm not technical about it. I couldn't even explain why anything feels right. I would just
Oh,
be able to say it just feels balanced. It feels right. I have taught, quite a few workshops, and there are some students that really want you to teach them how to make a good composition. And I have a hard time teaching that. I have often referred to, like, Edgar Payne's book on composition and
hmm.
land in the landscape. And that's a good reference point to start from, for some people to kind of be able to visualize things that might help in their quest to find good compositions. And maybe for some people it's very intuitive and they kind of always are able to find that, and others, they kind of can come to it as they practice more. But I find it to be something difficult to teach. I don't think analytically about it at all. So
Yeah, I'm the reverse. I'm very analytical to the point that I probably overthink everything to the
oh.
quarter inch, right?
No, it's good. I hear some people talk about composition, and honestly, like, I want to I want to be like, wow, I'm so impressed by what they're saying. And I'm very impressed, but I also don't understand any of it. And so I feel kind of like, I don't feel like I could have an intelligent conversation about it almost.
Mm.
I mean, I probably could. If I was sitting and looking at work with someone, I could discuss it. And even when I teach, I'll show some of my work, and then I'll kind of overlay some of those different, analytical aspects of composition. I'll overlay that and say, okay, this is kind of an L-shaped composition, or this one could be a pyramid.
Mm.
So I can kind of see it in my work that it ends up that way. It ends up fitting into some of these principles, but I don't necessarily think about that when I'm painting them. So yeah.
Yeah, I hear you. And that's true to be said for a lot of paintings. You can find color harmony, you can find composition styles, I guess, for lack of a better word,
Mhm.
within those paintings after they're done. Like we've somehow created this intuitively.
Yeah,
I think it's quite an eye opener for a lot of artists to realize that you can just put those ideas into a painting and not have originally followed them. And it takes, I think, the
right.
mystery out of it all, right? Now,
Absolutely.
we briefly talked about how the pandemic, I hate that word, changed the way everyone buys online and the accessibility it's created for artists. In some ways, it's much beneficial now than it was pre-pandemic. And I recently saw on your website that you did a painting drop in February, and I'm
Mhm.
really curious how that went for you.
Yeah, it was great. It was a fun one for me to do because I had this idea maybe like a year ago to do a series of nocturne paintings, calling the series like A Light in the Darkness. And then I thought I really want to make this a fundraiser. And so that probably helped a little bit because people know a lot of this is going to go to a good cause, to help provide part tuition or full tuition to somebody that was struggling or wanting to go to college but couldn't, that kind of thing. So to give them a light in the darkness, that was kind of the play on words that I was thinking of. And so I did a series. I think I had about 30 paintings in the series, mostly smaller, nothing much. Well, I had a few bigger than 8 by 10, but like 8 by 10, 11 by 12, around that range. And then yeah, I was able to almost sell out of them, which was awesome. And I was able to pay the tuition for this immigrant student that has moved here recently from Haiti. And she was trying to go to get a nursing degree. So I was able to help her to do that, which was awesome. So that was great. I have had success doing other shows like that in the past, online myself. It's not always, the most successful thing that you do, but I think it's worth giving it a try. Maybe a couple times a year I do something like that. So yeah.
Nice, congratulations.
Thanks.
Now, let's talk about values, because what I find about intriguing in many of your paintings is the landscape itself. Like it's all usually about the sky, but the land itself, I could probably break that down into two, three values max.
Hmm.
I find that really interesting. Do you do that to just have the land there as context and not take away from the sky, or what's the conscious reason for reducing the values in the landscape compared to the sky? I mean,
Yeah, I know. I don't know if I have a clear answer for that. Maybe so. Maybe it's, yeah, I guess often. So I guess in those paintings that you're thinking of, it's probably like a lower horizon line because the sky is more prominent. And maybe in that regard, because there is less depth in those small, like those shorter foregrounds, maybe I don't feel the need to create as much, because it's maybe everything you're seeing in that part, in that area is kind of all in the same plane,
yeah,
maybe that's part of it for some of those paintings. Like it's a distant, valley with trees or something. And so it doesn't really have a lot of contrast to begin with, but yeah, so that might be part of why that's the case. Other pieces, I'm trying to like look around my studio at paintings just to think about it. I don't know that there's like a conscious reason why I do that.
okay, yeah, no worries.
Other than what I said, that maybe that it's a low horizon, and so everything's kind of, most of those things are going to be on a similar plane.
Yeah.
And so I don't, depending on what it is, what the subject matter is in the foreground.
Now
Yeah.
we talked. This is a little bit difficult, more difficult question. We talked about a little bit how you create paintings, not necessarily from photos, um, but the idea of what you put into your sketchbook. That said, though, what do you look for when creating a painting? I mean, there must be something going in your head when you're sketching this out that, well, you said you start with minimal shapes and you kind of add them as you go, but are you looking for an emotion? Are you looking for, I don't know. I guess that's my question. What are you looking for when you start creating these things?
Right. Yeah. So I think for me, I think it is almost pure composition. I'm looking at shapes. I'm looking at things that for whatever reason it resonates with me.
Mm,
It like hits the right chord and it just makes me want to put it together. So like I'll sketch sometimes from photos, like if I've been somewhere and I want to have paintings of a specific place, because sometimes I'll do a series of paintings from travels or whatever, things that I've done. And I want to kind of have a series that's depicting these areas, these experiences that I had, these memories. And so it will matter to me that there's some sentimental value there, I guess. There's some maybe emotion or some experience that I want to express, but maybe it's more, but it still is about the shapes. So I'm not going to just paint something because I want to have a painting of that spot. If it doesn't really feel like inspiring to me, I'm probably not going to paint it. But when I'm out scoping out areas to paint, I mean, that can take forever sometimes before the inspiration really strikes.
you're one of
Like
those,
there's
are
some
you?
spots I know I can go and I can be guaranteed to have the inspiration hit me because I know the spot. I know that it's got really great shapes that I love to paint. But other times I can drive around forever and still not find anything and then just go back to the place I know I already want to paint at. So, but yeah, I think a lot of it is it's just something will hit me. Like, I don't know. It's like I'll be driving and it'll just kind of hit me. I'm like, oh, the way that sky is, like the way that shape of that cloud is and the shadow that it casts on the foreground below. And then it's just that one relationship, that one
Mm.
interaction of shapes that I want to capture. And so that's what becomes the focus. Everything else kind of fades away. And that's where the editing, I guess, comes in because I know that I don't need to add this bunch of trees here or this other part over here. I can just focus in on these elements, and everything else that I put into that composition should lead to those elements for me. So I feel like I do a lot of editing, to be able to focus in on that one thing. Like I'm looking at a painting right now on my shelf, and it's the silhouette of a palm tree from Northern California when I was on a trip there. And I'm sure that it didn't look exactly like the way that I painted it, but I wanted that silhouette. That was what
Mm.
hit me, was this silhouette. And so I kind of worked it in, so
Yeah.
everything else kind of, I mean, I can show it to you. Everything else just kind of fades away, but I don't know if you'll be able to see it very well, but I don't know. It just kind of like gives an idea of that. Like,
Oh, yes, yes. You have that one on your website, I think, or something similar.
yeah, yeah, it's still there. No one wants it yet. So one day. Anyway, so I don't know, just that's kind of it'll just be like one thing like that just kind of strikes me. And then I think, yeah, that's what I want to paint. And then I figure out a composition for that will, the right shape that's a square. It felt like it was the right shape for that. Sometimes it'll be, I paint on a lot of panels that are odd sizes because whatever I'll put just different size rectangles in my sketchbook and then I just kind of fill them. And so
Oh,
I'll do that.
interesting.
Sometimes I'll just put a bunch of different shapes on my in my sketchbook, and then I go in and I fill them with different compositions. And then whatever feels like the right dimensions, the right proportions, then I'll cut panels to kind of match that, and then I paint it out. So
That's a pretty cool way to do it. I haven't heard anybody doing that. Now I got so many questions here. I think you hit the nail on the head when you said when you're out plein air painting, looking for a location, it's that one thing. Because a lot of people when they go out, they go, "How do you know what to paint?" And they're just looking
Mhm.
at, right? And
Yeah.
you're exactly right. Sometimes it's that light on that tree right there in the shadow. Sometimes it's the silhouette of the palm tree, and then you build the painting from there, and it makes things so much easier. But like you said,
Mhm.
sometimes you can't find that one thing either. But
Right, right.
I think that's a
Yeah.
fantastic way to describe it, and I'm gonna have to steal that. Thank you.
And even when I can't find the one thing, sometimes it's an overall feeling that I want to capture. So maybe it's like the color, like I want to capture the bright white of the clouds against the sky, but maybe there's a bunch of clouds and there's nothing really cohesive. It's not feeling like a cohesive composition or whatever. And so, but I want to capture that feeling of like the bright white clouds against this kind of like really cool blue sky. And then I can kind of work with that. And oh, and then the way that the landscape is below it, like the colors, how they're interplaying with each other. And then I can kind of work that into the painting. So there are some times where I do sketches that are not as strong compositionally, but I'll put notes in there of like the effect that I loved about it. And so
Hmm.
sometimes that will be the thing that pulls me in, but it's more often those shapes and kind of the one, like kind of a couple of shape relationships that really pulls me in. So
Yeah, yeah, that's
yeah.
interesting. Now, when you create different size rectangles in your sketchbook, are they standard proportions?
Sometimes.
Okay, see, I find this
So
wonderful.
yeah, I mean, so definitely sometimes a lot. I paint on a lot of standard sizes just because it is a lot easier to frame them. But I do build frames too, so I'm not too afraid to paint on odd sizes because I'm confident to be able to build a frame for it. But or just, get one custom made or whatever. But yeah, it just depends on like sometimes I just feel like it calls for like a more wide, like a more panoramic size or yeah, just not quite a square, but not
Yeah, yeah,
quite the standard rectangle. So and sometimes it's just by accident, like I'll be sketching and it just kind of works out to be this size, and then when I go to paint it I'm like, it's not a square, it's not a regular standard rectangle. Should I like try to rework this composition or should I just do it? And then I'm like, oh, I have this random odd size offcut, that I just sewed, and you know I'll just I'll just paint it on that. So I have a lot of paintings that are not standard sizes.
yeah. I think that's wonderful because sometimes it just has to be what it is, regardless if it's
Yeah,
standard or not, right? And there's a lot of advantages, like you said, to standard size, but I think the true, well, I shouldn't say that the true sense of an artist is doing what you want, but we're all restricted monetarily. But I think that's just a wonderful way to do it. Approach it as the outside is part of the composition. You don't have to fit the composition in this box kind of thing, right?
right.
Yeah.
Well, and
Yeah.
there's just times where I feel like it allows you to be maybe a little more creative in the composition. Sometimes I think I just get bored with the standard size. I just kind of feel like, I don't want to fill this rectangle again in the same way. I want to try something different. I want to stretch it out and be able to like bring in these sweeping clouds a little bit more or whatever.
Hmm.
So
Just like your approach to sketching, you kind of work with the composition until it feels right, and that's kind of when that's done. Is that pretty much the same approach with your paintings? You feel that it's complete?
yeah, like are you kind of asking like when do I feel like it's done?
Yeah, more or less. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, such a hard question. And it's different for every painting, I feel like. But I think it's just once I feel like there's nothing else, like it's not, it's balanced now. But also I like to feel like there's a little bit of dissonance in my work. Like I like the feeling of the abstraction and the nuance that's there in a painting. I don't want it to feel all buttoned up and tidy, I guess. So like for me, if it's feeling too tight, I'll sometimes go in with a big brush and just like whole swaths will be like changed, because it makes my skin crawl to like have it be so tight, or there's not as much movement as I want there to be or something. So I think for me, it's like when I feel like that movement is there, when it feels like my eye is able to kind of continually move around the painting, I'm not like going off the painting on any one spot and not coming back into it somewhere else. Yeah, like there's nothing, or it's not pulling me away from like that main idea that I wanted to convey from the beginning. Yeah, once it feels balanced, I guess. Yeah, it feels like that's when I finish. And it's kind of like my brush goes down and I'm done, like
Hmm.
I don't really think too much about it again. I mean, sometimes I'll put a painting down that I think I've finished. And then after it's been sitting for a little while, like, I have a whole bunch of paintings on the floor right now. They're always on the floor. Just some of them are drying, some are in frame, some are just sitting there. I'm prepping for a show in May. And so I'll look at them, and then sometimes I'll pull one up off that floor or something, and it'll go back up on the easel after a couple weeks, and I'm like, I need to like move some things. It's still not sitting right with me or whatever. So
Hmm.
giving it time to dry, going back into it. I like working that way too. I work often in layers and things
Gotcha.
like that. So
Now, with doing that, it tells me that you don't really jump into any studies after your sketch. You kind of just go right into the painting and it develops as you go. And at some point you
mhm.
think it's done, but then later on you kind of think it's not. And that painting, in a sense, is a study in itself as it progresses through, more or less, right?
Yeah.
Quite a very
Yeah.
different way to look.
Yeah, I do like to feel like even when I do plein air paintings, I don't want to like, I don't ever want to put pressure on myself and make it seem like, and tell myself this has to be something that I can sell. This has to be something that's worthy to show, because I feel like I do my best work when I'm letting go of all of that. And I'm just in that moment and moving shapes and playing, I guess, a little bit more, so much better.
Yeah. And if anybody's listening, that's a fantastic way to do it. Tell yourself you don't care and just go through the process.
Yeah.
Of course you care, but telling yourself
Yeah.
he doesn't, it's an amazing mind game, isn't it?
It is. Well, it's like, and you tell yourself it doesn't matter. And in a way it doesn't. And I like to tell myself that when I'm at my studio, because sometimes I'll be working on a painting and then I go to bed and I'm just kind of discouraged with the painting.
Mm.
It didn't work right or nothing worked right that day or whatever. And then I get up and the next morning and I'm like, oh yeah, I have a bunch of like really failed paintings going on in my studio right now. But I think if I tell myself it doesn't matter, it's in my studio, it's just sitting there. Like nobody has to see that. Like they don't have to see it till I'm ready to show it, until it's done. So I always like to think it's not that it's a bad painting, it's just that it isn't finished yet. That's what I like to tell myself.
Absolutely. I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
That'd be a good quote for the wall, right? With technology at our fingertips, you know, I'm so jealous of the younger generation in some ways that they can just see the history of an art or a new artist that no one ever really knows, and they're at their fingertips.
Hmm.
But saying that now, who's on your list of aspiring artists that you kind of look to, if any name comes to
Oh,
top of your
artists that
head?
I like, do you mean contemporary artists or
Just artists in general, whether
any
they're on
general? Okay.
Instagram or they're a little bit of from
Yeah.
history or
Yeah, I mean, there's so many. And it's funny because a lot of the artists that I really love aren't even landscape artists. But in terms of like an artist that pops into my head when you ask that is Emil Carlson. I'm not sure if you're familiar with his work.
no.
American, but he, I believe, was from somewhere in Scandinavia. I'm not sure exactly where, but yeah, his work, he does a lot of clouds as well. And I love the texture of his clouds, his skies. I mean, his landscapes I think are just beautiful. They're very poetic, like meditations almost, I feel like. He just has really interesting surface texture as well. It's almost like they're luminous, like they're sparkling or something. I don't know. I love
Hmm.
his work. That's one that comes to mind that I haven't seen any of his work in person, but I would love to. I don't know where any is, but any of his artwork is, but I would be amazed. It would be amazing to see that. I mentioned Leviton earlier. He's one that I looked at a little bit recently as well. I think he has very lyrical landscapes. Trying to think of like other contemporary artists that I look at. I mean, there's so many on Instagram. It's hard to even like think of just one, but like one that I remember stumbling on when I first got on Instagram, maybe about 8 years ago or something. I don't remember how long ago I actually got on Instagram, maybe 7 years ago, was Mark Hansen, landscape painter, lives in South Carolina. Anyway, he's great. His work is great. And I remember stumbling on that early on, and he was the judge for one of those online art competitions that I don't know. Anyway, it was a different one that they're not running anymore. And he was the judge, and he voted mine in to that competition. And I was so excited. I was like, oh my goodness, this artist that I love.
Oh,
But yeah,
hell,
he's great. So does a lot of skies too, a lot of big clouds and
yeah,
stuff.
yeah, I can see that being attracted to people who paint clouds, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting you mentioned competitions. We all do it. Well, maybe not we all do it. We sometimes do it. We got to put ourselves out there. Even having a show or putting our painting in there
Mhm.
can lead to defeat. No one buys it. We don't hear back. It doesn't get in the show. It does get in the show. It doesn't win an award. How do you handle this rejection?
Yeah. I think just like not feeling too precious about anything that I'm putting out there, I guess. So I mean, I've experienced that just like any artist has. I think believing in your work, trusting in it, and knowing, I guess for me, I don't take it that hard, I guess. I think maybe some artists it's harder to take that rejection. I don't think maybe it's pride. I'm just like, they don't know. They don't know what they're doing. I don't know. I don't mean that, because there's genuinely times where I know that it's just not that caliber that they're looking for. And that for me is fine, because I kind of would rather my work be in a place where it belongs rather
Hmm.
than trying to stretch and put it somewhere where it doesn't belong yet. So I'm okay with that. I'm okay with some of the gatekeeping that takes place, because I'm like, you know what, it'll end up being where it's appreciated and where it can be, where it can kind of shine, I guess, in a way, but also it helps me to be motivated to think, well, I do personally as an artist value the recognition of like my peers and artists that I admire. And so whenever there is an artist that I really admire and they have a compliment for my work, it's exciting. You know, it's like,
Mhm.
wow, they see, because I know that they see things that maybe the average person doesn't see. So that is very rewarding. But I'm also not too heartbroken when it doesn't, when one particular painting doesn't make its way into a show or into a competition, because I feel like, you know what, I'm still painting. It's fine. Like it's just one painting, one judge, that kind of thing. So
Yeah,
I don't
that's
let it
right.
get me down.
That's right.
And I've often heard too that like the more failures you have, like the more you're going to grow, because you have to push yourself and keep trying. So
I think we can all attest to that statement right
yeah.
there. Your process, you started back in 2007, but let's say take you to 2010 when you maybe were a little more comfortable with painting. How much has your process changed from then to now?
Yeah, I think quite a bit. For me, plein air painting, like I said, kind of came into the picture about a year after I started painting, and that became a huge game changer. I learned so much by getting out and painting all the time. And I paint a lot too. I paint almost every day, and have for all those years. And so I feel like over time, I think I kind of developed the way that I work from my sketches as opposed to working from photographs when I was first painting. So I was doing that kind of in the beginning, and then I switched to not really doing that. And I don't know what my reasoning was for that at the time that I made that switch, but I think it just felt more natural to me in some ways. I don't think I have like a photographic memory, but I have been told by other artists that like they're surprised when they see me paint from sketches and not from photos and things like that, because they're like, how can you remember the colors? How can you remember the light? How can you remember this? And I don't know that I am remembering all of those things, but I remember like the impression that something made on me,
Mm,
and I'm able to kind of put that in there. But I think it's also because I've done it that way for so long. So like when I do look out and see, so sometimes I'll be driving and I can't sketch, but I'll see like four things from point A to point B that I really wanted, that I know could be paintings. And then when I stop, if I have my sketchbook with me, I have them all still in my head. I'm like, okay, I gotta put that one down, and I know exactly what shapes I want to put down, and I put it down. And then I'm like, okay, what was the other one? And then I'll put that one down, so I try to capture it because it's fleeting. It's not like it would be there for forever. But I try to like record it as much as I can. And I think that might help me to be able to paint that way too, because I've like trained my brain, I guess, maybe to hold
Hmm.
on to those images, I guess, a little bit longer. And that allows me, and I can make notes, of light effects or certain colors. And I try to be really descriptive if I need to be specific, if I want to be specific about it. So
Yeah, and I think you're right. You just created your own process and it sticks with you, right? I have a friend who does the same. I've tried that process, sketching, making notes. It just
Mhm.
doesn't work for me. No, I'm
Yeah,
not doing this. Too much
right.
work. I just want to get in there and paint and fail and try to fix
Mhm.
it, right?
Right.
So, yeah, that's
Yeah.
interesting. I'm curious on how you think when mixing colors. Of course, we all know primary, secondary, tertiary, how to mix them, blah, blah, blah. Do you look at it in terms of if, in temperature shifting, or do you think of it as making something more yellow, more blue, more orange?
Yeah. Temperature shifting for sure. Like warmer and cooler, I think is the way
Yeah.
that I think of it. Yeah. And so, and yeah, I'm definitely not like a strong color theorist, so I've always kind of used the same colors from the beginning. I've added one or two over the years, but it's stayed pretty, I mean, I guess I'm always at it. I've added like maybe more than that, but I've kind of stuck with a pretty basic palette. And I think you just kind of get that muscle memory, or like you just kind of are able to like get to your mixes quickly. And so I don't really do a lot of like experimenting, I guess, with
Mm.
color mixing, because I'm kind of comfortable with how I get to it already, how I get to my greens or how I get to this cool peachy color in the sky or whatever it is. So, and there's times where I feel like I could expand that and like expand my knowledge and understanding, but just I haven't had a priority. It hasn't been a priority like enough for me to really put the time in to do that. But yeah, so I think it's definitely the more warm or cool. Does this need to be warmer? Does this need to be cooler? Yeah.
Everyone I talk to is always different, right?
Yeah, I'm
Their
sure.
approach. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Now with this, oh yeah, and your videos on YouTube, the one you did outside with the plein air, I noticed you're picking up the palette knife a lot and putting it through the
Yeah.
sky, and that kind of rang a bell in my head. I thought, oh my God, why haven't I done that? And I have to assume it's to knock down texture or to just take something out that was there but you didn't really want, and it blends it in, so it's not really it's standing
Yeah.
out, kind of like we had a
Mhm.
conversation before. I guess that's always something you've done.
Yeah, not always. So that's maybe something that developed in my work over the years. I don't think I did that very much in the beginning at all. I didn't understand the use of a palette knife, and I never really painted with one either. I didn't apply paint with a palette knife ever. I still really don't. Every now and then I will use it if I want to put just like kind of a flat color in one spot or something. But most of the time, I really just use it to take away. I like not really blend so much, but kind of scrub the paint around a little bit and scuff it up and scrape back. And sometimes, yeah, to scrape something off, maybe so that it allows me. Like one thing I like about the palette knife, especially when I'm plein air painting, is that it allows me to work more in an alla prima style without muddying my paint, I guess, a little bit, because I can, if I scrape it back a little bit, then I can put another like thicker paint over top of that without it blending too much with what was there. And I think it creates a lot of interesting edges and allows for that layered effect in a painting, even if you're not doing a lot of layers and when you're out painting plein air, but it can still give it that effect of like scraping it back. And so some of that color is left behind. And then when I add something on top of that, it shows through in some areas. So I do like how it allows some of those accidental edges to kind of be in place so that I can then be more deliberate about how I'm going to add back in over top of that. And I really like the effect that it gives. So yeah, some areas it's scraped back with a palette knife. Some areas it's just like smoothed flat with a palette knife. Kind of just depends. But I do like, I am really drawn to surface texture in a painting when I see a painting in person. It's beautiful to see a painting that has like no brush marks and it's still beautifully executed, but it's not as exciting to me, I guess,
Yeah.
if I'm seeing it in person. And so I am I like that feeling of like the artist hand that you can see in the work. So, and that's the thing that when I see like a painting in a gallery, and even like, when I go with my husband or we'll go to the museum, and it's not like he's an artist, but even for him, that's what's fascinating. He's like, wow, like the artist put that there, they put that smudge of paint right there. And I like that. I like to see the artist's hand in their work. I'm not real like technical about making sure the surface texture is just the way I want it, but I do like when there is that texture. So yeah.
Yeah, it adds a uniqueness you cannot just get with brush alone, because that one scrape by that palette knife creates a texture of thin and thick. Even if you
Yeah.
apply a brush stroke over it, it gives that
Hmm.
dimension, and you wonder to yourself, how the hell did they do that? And until you
Yeah.
start painting, right? That's when you
Yeah.
realize, oh
Oh,
yeah, you
it's
can
so
scrape
true.
it. Yeah.
Oh yeah. And especially when you see a painting that has just such interesting surface quality, you realize how much went into it. You know, you realize that it wasn't just kind of, I don't know. Like I think when I first started painting, I also thought to be a real master, you have to get it right the first time. Like the
Yeah.
first paint that you put down, that's what should stay. That because you knew exactly what you needed to do and exactly what temperature to make this color. And but I think over time, I've learned that that's not how I work, and I'm okay with that. And I don't feel like that is mastery either anymore. I think there are some artists that do have that ability and they can paint that way, and it can be masterful and beautiful. But for me, I don't think that that's the only way to mastery. And so I think it's kind of exciting to explore my painting as I'm working on it and not feel like I have to have it all mapped out and I know exactly where I need to lay this color and that color. And I think it creates a lot more interest when there is evidence of work that's been done on it, you know, like the
Yeah.
different layers and the different passes that you've gone through and all of
Yeah.
that.
It,
So
it shows like a fluidity and emotion in the piece that isn't really there otherwise, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
Now, we talked a lot about shapes, composition in your paintings and stuff like that. And generally, when you're sketching, I'm sure all shapes, generally with line, become positive shapes. But when you're in a
Mhm.
painting, how much do you go into negative shapes? Is that something you're really into?
I mean, I think about it. I think it's not something that I am consciously thinking about when I'm initially putting in my composition, like when I'm laying out those initial shapes. But it's something that I notice more as I'm working on it and when I feel like maybe things aren't balanced or there's something off. And that's when I'm able to, that's when I kind of know I need to look at those negative shapes and to see what's going on with those, because maybe that's why it feels imbalanced. Like even sometimes my husband will see a painting of mine and he'll be like, why is this doing this? You know, like, why is this cloud looking like that? And I'm like, oh, I didn't even see that before because it's in the negative shapes, you know? And I think that that is something that I don't really think about until later on as I'm working on the painting. And so, I mean, I think that is a fun thing to play around with when I'm doing skies though too, because often it's those negative shapes that you're kind of carving out and you're carving into the positive shapes with the negative shapes, and that can create whole new shapes. I just think I think that's kind of one of the funnest parts. And for me, like I said, it usually kind of comes at the end, more closer to the tail end of a painting when I'm really trying to like refine as much as I refine, you know, my skies or whatever, you know. So then I'm able to kind of carve out those negative shapes to create more balance or more interest or whatever.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm. Interesting, interesting. Now, moving on to mark making. All artists have their kind of unique way of doing it, but for you, how important is it in your overall finished piece?
Yeah, like I guess like I said before, I like there to be surface texture. I like there to be texture in my paintings. I don't want it to feel like super thin, you know. There's times where paintings are thinner than other times. I think painting on canvas makes it harder to build up texture personally. So I like to paint on like a smoother surface, even if it's like more fine linen or whatever, because I think your paint lays more, you know, on the surface just
Yeah.
differently. But yeah, I do like I don't consciously, I guess I don't really consciously think about mark making so much, but I guess if I was consciously thinking about it, it would be kind of those final marks that I'm making in a painting that I would
Mm,
think more about where am I putting this final, you know, mark or
yeah.
these final touches and that kind of thing. And maybe I feel like it needs something more in a certain area to have the texture that leads you into something. I don't know. I guess I don't really think too much about the mark making in the moment though.
Interesting, interesting. So even when you're doing a cloud, say, and you have a lot of paintings where there's looks like distant rains because there's that value shift, right?
Mhm.
When you're laying in that distant rain, you're not thinking, oh, I want to put it on a little bit of an angle so it looks like it's more forceful compared to if I do it vertical.
Yeah, like I'm thinking about that, I guess. I guess I think of those areas as shapes of their own anyway, though. So, I mean, I guess for sure, like if I was doing something like that, for instance, like a rain veil, off in the distance, I would want that to be softer, so that would end up probably being softer in my mark making,
Hmm.
and also the direction, obviously, that I'd be pushing it. I mean, I guess that's something to think about when if I'm painting, fields or something in a landscape, that there are often I will like the slope of the land, the marks will kind of go with that, or like the grasses, like in the dunes, like in this painting, the marks are going in that direction. It's not like you're doing like a paint by number where it's like I'm just putting color in everywhere, but the marks are definitely a part of that, I guess, to create movement, the
Good
sense
point.
of
Yes.
movement.
Because on your website, you have a painting of a wheat field, it looks like, and it's all very motion. And it
Yeah,
reminds me a lot of Van
right.
Gogh's wheat field for some reason. But
Yeah,
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 it's very definite how you've done that. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Nice. Now it seems like you just work with brushes and occasional palette knife. You haven't created or just found some sort of tool that you just love and you use in your paintings all the time at all?
Yeah, no. Like
No?
I use my fingers a little bit.
Oh, interesting.
Every now and then. I mean,
Just
it's
to
not a lot.
soften?
Finger painting. But no, I mean, it's like if I just want to blend like one little spot, I'll stick my fingers in my painting sometimes. Yeah. I mean, if I'm painting something like this large, I just finished a really big commission. There were areas in that where I got a paper towel and kind of like rub, to blend areas. I would kind of do that. It was 11 feet wide, so it was really big, and there were some areas where I needed to like, blend something in the clouds or something, and so I was just like rubbing it with paper towel or something. But no, I really don't have any other. Trying to think if there's any other tools that I really use. There aren't, I don't think. I think there's times where I would like to try other tools. I know of other artists that do, or they'll try different things, and I've just never really gotten into it, I guess. But
Yeah. So 11 feet wide, that is crazy. How much paint did you go through?
oh yeah, so much paint. And it's probably doesn't have as much surface texture as like a lot of my other,
Hmm.
smaller paintings, but it is harder to get that. And it was on canvas, it was on loose canvas. So it's just like the paint kind of just like falls into canvas a little bit more. But yeah, a lot of paint. And it took forever to even just to put in that first pass, just to like build it up and lay it down. It was a beast, but it was fun.
Yeah, the nemesis of having work on canvas, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
know, I know.
Yeah.
It was good. It's fun. It's good to give yourself a challenge and to work in a way that isn't always like natural, I think sometimes because it forces you to try something different and it pushes you outside of your comfort zone, which
Yeah.
is always going to teach you something. So,
Absolutely. And then going
yeah,
back to the norm is always easier, right?
absolutely.
We have a couple minutes left, and I want to ask
Yeah,
you two questions that I ask everybody.
okay.
The first one is, what is the best piece of advice you've been given?
It's a good question. Something that I have said before, and I think this still holds true, is that someone told me that I should paint every day. When I first started painting, and I wasn't, obviously, like I said, I'm a self-taught artist, and somebody just said, you should paint every day, even if it's just for 5 minutes. This is back when, I had like a little baby, like our first son was born around that time. And so it was busy and I wasn't always able to paint every day, but that was kind of always in the back of my mind. Like, if I want to really get better at this, I have to actually do it. I have to do the work. So I think that was great advice for me from the beginning. And I still think about it. I still think about that advice. So yeah, definitely. I think that was
That's
it.
yeah, that's wonderful advice. There's nothing beats doing, right?
Absolutely.
And hopefully you can have a different answer for this question, but what would be your top piece of advice to give other painters?
Ooh. So, I mean, I think everybody's got maybe different like motivations as to why they want to be a painter, I guess. Maybe everybody's probably different from that in that way. But if you really want to be a serious artist, then you need to put the art first, like above making money, above creating content about your art. I think I see a lot of artists that they want to be an artist, but they want to make a living as an artist, which is obviously like really an important component to being able to pursue this as like a lifetime pursuit, I think, for me, I wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing if I wasn't also selling my art. I would be literally, it would be stacked to the ceilings, you know? So I'm grateful to have that and it's motivating. But if I become too focused on that aspect and I'm not focusing on the actual painting that I'm doing, like the craft, the skill building, the practice, the hours, that for me is maybe the advice that I would give to people, like make that be your focus as an artist.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Exactly. You can get caught up into that promotional Instagram hype for no reason
Yeah,
at all, right? Yeah. That's great
absolutely.
advice.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. That pretty much concludes tonight. You can find Erin at erinspencerart.com and also on Instagram at Erin Spencer Art. Thank you so much for the interview.
You.
I'm inspired to go out and paint skies,
Oh,
and I
good.
really appreciate you coming in tonight. I really do. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for being on.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Thank you very much for coming and joining us. And with that, I'll say good night. Take care.